Good morning, everyone. This is the very last session. At this session, we'll make a conclusion, especially in terms of the Seoul Declaration and also the summary of this session, this whole conference. It is a great privilege to take a chair of this meaningful, wonderful, and helpful sessions of this conference. We have 4 distinguished speakers at this session, so time was limited. Each speakers needed to keep the time, 15 minutes, please. I would like to introduce the first speaker. Sally Caswell is a professor of social and health research and co-director of the Seoul and the Waikiki Research Center School of Public Health at Massey University, New Zealand. Also, Professor Sally also has an active involvement with NGO sector, including GAPA, of which she is a chair of Scientific Advisory Board and APAPA. Professor Sally is a fellow of Royal Society of New Zealand. Please welcome Sally.
I'm very pleased to be here, and I was given a very difficult task by the conference organizers, our Korean hosts, to talk about an ideal national alcohol policy in 15 minutes, but given that they have organized such a wonderful conference, I'm certainly not putting any complaints or criticisms towards them. One reason why I think it's a very difficult task is that all of you people in the room know your own national circumstances far better than I do. And we all know that alcohol policies are very much influenced by the policy settings, the history, the drinking culture, the alcohol market. So it's really difficult to say anything too sensible, I think, about ideal national alcohol policies. On the other hand, when I was thinking about it, I thought, well, you know, just as we become very normalized to the level of alcohol and drinking in our society, so I think we perhaps become a bit habituated to the kind of alcohol policies that we have in place. And maybe sometimes our idea of ideal policy actually becomes closer to what we think is feasible policy. And then I remembered that we did some analysis of ICAP work a while ago, ICAP's policy documents that they make available to countries who are developing policies. And one of the things we recognized in the analysis was that the word effectiveness is never mentioned. So they talk all the time about feasible alcohol policy. So I guess what I would like to do is to make sure that we, in this session, go back to this notion of effectiveness and perhaps look at some of the national alcohol policies which are a little bit challenging in the level of the restrictions that they demonstrate to us all. I don't know, I can't see it, so. Thank you. Oops, needs to go up. Yeah. Thank you very much. So what is an ideal policy and where might we find it? The evidence base we've heard about several times in this conference already. The Korean language version of Alcohol No Ordinary Commodity is now out. But as well as looking at the evaluation research on individual strategies, we also have a growing body of research which looks at ranking countries in terms of how many effective policies they have in place. And the Brand study, which looked at 30 OECD countries, and the Amphora study more recently looking in Europe, these are showing that there is, broadly speaking, a relationship between the restrictive alcohol policies and alcohol consumption, and it's in the direction we would hope to see. Then I think when we think about effectiveness, we should also take into account the screen test. This comes from the tobacco advocacy field, but we are very clear that when the industry reacts very, very strongly against the strategies that we put forward, and they do so in terms of pricing, in terms of marketing, and in terms of some controls on availability, then it's likely that they will be going to have an effect. So I looked to see what country has the ideal alcohol policy. Well, I'm afraid we have to say that no country gets a really good score in all areas. But it's also interesting when you try and do this, how difficult it is to get really good information about what is actually happening on the ground. What price is alcohol being sold for, and how does that relate to people's income? What level of density of alcohol outlets are people exposed to? We got more information available on the bad examples than I think on the good, and I think this reflects the stage that we're at in alcohol control development, and it's a bit of a contrast with the tobacco situation, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I think it's very important to start thinking about policy in terms of the stated objective of the legislation, and I've taken this one from the Korean Draft National Alcohol Policy Act, which is being displayed at this conference. And I can honestly say that I think that that draft act is an extremely good example of moving towards an ideal national alcohol control policy. The objective is a good one. It's very important to have these objectives because they are useful if a government needs to defend itself under economic treaties about why they are putting these kinds of restrictions in place. It has to be very clear they're doing it for the health and well-being of their people, not for trade restrictive purposes. Pricing policy, hugely important, talked about a lot at the conference. I think we can say, first of all, that if a country has significant proportions of alcohol which is not taxed, which is either illicit or informal, it's important at the same time as developing good excise tax policy to increase the proportion which is taxed. And then we need to be clear that there needs to be a specific alcohol tax, not just a value-added tax. There needs to be a tax reflecting the potency of the beverage. There need to be regular adjustments in line with inflation. But more than that, we also need to look at what's happening in terms of incomes and the general affordability of alcohol relative to how much people have to spend. Clearly, in some countries with fairly complex tax systems, and also in countries where the retail sector is very big and powerful and can afford to sell alcohol, often at a loss, in order to get people into their shops to buy groceries, for example, then we sometimes need to look at minimum unit price as well. And there are several initiatives going on, as you know, in the UK. We've heard quite a bit about them. So how much would a minimum unit price be? This will be really interesting to see as this evolves. It's mentioned in the Korean draft policy. The UK people are modelling. It's looking like we're talking about maybe a US dollar for a small half a glass of alcohol, the size of alcohol that many people would drink. Physical availability, I thought we should start with the example of the monopolies, and there are monopolies outside of the Nordic countries in some states and countries around the world. If these are run with an eye to preserving and protecting the health of the population, they are effective. And you can see this example from Norway, a fairly restrained example of the way in which alcohol is being sold. If you don't have monopolies or the opportunity, then we have in place licensing regimes, or we need to have in place licensing regimes. And we have a very different portrayal of the way that alcohol is sold. That's my local supermarket just around the corner from where I live. And there's about 4 aisles of alcohol in my supermarket, plus it's distributed throughout the store. So establishing specific alcohol licenses with fees which reflect the damage that's done from the sale of alcohol from those places. And these licensing regimes have to be able to refuse licenses. To put in place gradual reduction if there's a particular area with problems, and to have regular renewal so that if a place is badly managed, it can be challenged and license refused. The grounds for restrictions need to be in terms of the health of the people, not just impacts on the neighbourhood, although they're very important. And obviously the sorts of things licensing regimes control include the overall density, how licenses are clustered together, whether they're close to churches, close to schools, and the type of premise. Some people think we should keep alcohol in alcohol-specific retail outlets, not place them in food stores. Trading hours, I found a good example of a restrictive trading hours in Brazil, where a city with a very high rate of alcohol-related homicides reduced it from 24-hour availability to 11 p.m. In other jurisdictions, I think we'd be more inclined to say midnight would be a good, or even 2 a.m., particularly in those places where we're used to being exposed to 24-hour availability. Off-license, again, an example from Norway, very restrictive, but still with support from the population. And again, in many places, we would be more likely to see people citing 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m. as their ideal goal. Availability to young people, crucially important. US stands out with a minimum purchase age of 21 years. In some parts of the world, including my own, we're beginning to really focus on the fact that kids are getting a lot of their alcohol from their slightly older friends and siblings, so social supply is an aspect of national alcohol policy. And restricting exposure to marketing and promotion. When you look around the world, there is a lot of this going on. There are a lot of countries, this isn't a complete list, with fairly restrictive policies in place and more on the way. Ireland, for example, close to a complete ban on alcohol sponsorship. Finland looking at social media restrictions. Very exciting developments in this field. Drink driving response is crucial, setting in place a blood alcohol control level, 0.05, 0.03, 0 for young drivers, inexperienced drivers, strong enforcement and quick responses. And finally, community action and advocacy, and we have the very good example from Thailand of an agency funded with a levy on alcohol, which has done so much good work in terms of community action and advocacy. And my final comment, how do we get there? We know that moving towards ideal alcohol policy will often be incremental, but we also need to be poised, ready to take the opportunities that present themselves and to work towards specific bits of an ideal alcohol policy if that is what becomes possible. We need to build NGO alliances and broaden the depth of the width and the depth of those. We need media advocacy, crucial, cross-sector government collaboration. We really need global governance. We need, as the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control provides for the tobacco field, the platform to allow us to compare, to learn from each other, to compare and even compete in terms of the ways in which we are drafting and developing ideal alcohol policy. And data and dissemination, crucially important. We need to keep putting out there what the level of harms are, including harms to other than the drinker, what the effectiveness of different policies are, and finally we need to make very visible all of the different ways in which the industry is attempting to subvert our efforts to put in place really good ideal alcohol control policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sally Caswell, to save your time to present. Okay, I would like to introduce the second speaker, Professor Ronaldo Laranjeira from Brazil. He is going to present challenges and opportunities in Latin America. Dr. Ronaldo is a professor of Federal University of São Paulo, Brazil. He is currently the head of the Department of Clinic Psychiatry. He is the director of Alcohol and Drug Research Unit of the UNAID and the general coordinator of National Institute of Public Policy for Alcohol and Other Drugs. Please welcome Dr. Ronaldo Laranjeira.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presence. think I'm say something completely different than Sally was trying to say. She was trying to say the ideal alcohol policy, and I am saying about the real alcohol policy in a continent, which is what I will call an unregulated alcohol market. I think in my talk I will give you three messages. First, what I mean by unregulated alcohol market. The second, I will give you very few examples, 3 examples, what can be done in an unregulated alcohol market like Brazil. And the 3 messages that I want to give is what this country and the region are doing. First, it's important to know that Latin America is very important for the alcohol industry because it's a growing market. It's a market where people are drinking quite a lot. Then it's one of the priorities of the alcohol industry. What are the challenges in this part of the world? First, as I mentioned, we have an unregulated alcohol market and the strong interest of the alcohol industry. The network of politicians with close interest with the alcohol industry. Policymakers uneducated about alcohol policy. No community involvement with alcohol industry, with alcohol policy, and very few good examples. That's our challenge. But I'll say a little bit of Brazil. What it means to be an unregulated alcohol market in Brazil. For me, I pick up some of the good examples. 1 million places selling alcohol in Brazil. We have a population of 200 million. Therefore, we have 1 selling point of alcohol for 200 personnel or 200 inhabitants. To show the strength of the alcohol industry, each of these establishments, they are visited weekly by the alcohol industry in order to see how to increase their selling of beer. It's important to say that 70% of these places has no license to work. I'm not saying that license to sell alcohol. In Brazil, this doesn't have anything near close to it. You don't have any license to sell alcohol. We are saying that 70% of these places have no license at all. 30% of the intoxicated drivers on the weekends. We have done the research. Teenagers buying alcohol on 90% of the places. The price in Brazil is really cheap. 1 liter of our spirit costs $1. A can of beer, 30 cents. Just to show you that I know a little bit my arithmetics, 1 liter of orange juice, and Brazil produces lots and lots of orange juice, exports orange juice, costs you $3.50. Just to see how cheap is alcohol in Brazil. And I'd say where the alcohol is sold is a place is sometimes is in the house. You can open a window and sell alcohol. It don't have to be a well-established place to sell. It's a very simple place to account for this 1 million selling point of alcohol in my country. What's the consequence of that? The main alcohol industry, called Ambev, became this year the biggest industry in Brazil. Become bigger than the company which sells petrol. In Brazil, selling beer is more profitable than selling gasoline. And the number of cars in Brazil is very substantial. That's the size of the consequences of unregulated alcohol market. How can we, as a public health professional, researcher, deal in a place where the marketing also is very aggressive, very unregulated, where our children are exposed on a daily basis on image like that. Daily basis, 24 hours a day, no restriction. And on top of everything that, I and my colleagues wrote an editorial last year because FIFA, the next World Cup will be in Brazil, 2014, and everybody was most welcome to be in my country. But the problem is that FIFA, which is a private company, imposed that Brazil change the law to allow alcohol to be sold in the stadiums. We had a law, you can see our coach, the Brazilian coach, football coach, promoting in the Carnival of Rio a brand of beer. Then, since 1995, we could note extreme violence in the stadiums of Brazil. Brazil is a country of the football, but also is a country where violence is extremely common. And then in 2003, we changed the law. We created a spectator law, which means to ban some behaviors, and in particular alcohol, from the stadiums, or the stadium. Of course, it was really welcome law, because the stadium became safer, and everybody was happy with this safer place. I take my kids to the stadium and feel safe. But in 2013, the FIFA asked and imposed that is part of the world game to have to be sell alcohol on the stadium. And the government passed a special law that in this moment we could allow to sell alcohol and beer, particularly in our stadium. Our president signed this law. And of course, several places are saying, well, if you change for the World Cup, why not start doing that? And Rio de Janeiro is already doing that. They are selling alcohol, although the World Cup hasn't started. It will take nearly a few months for the World Cup to start. They are selling already alcohol on the stadiums. That probably is a good example that where private interests change a law, a federal law in the country, in order to impose selling alcohol. For me, it's the extreme of an unregulated alcohol market. But, okay, that's the first message. For me, that's the size of unregulated alcohol market. I think this conference was a wonderful conference. I enjoyed very much. But I don't think we have discussed as much as we should. That's the importance for this part of the world, where what shall we do in places like that where the market is really unregulated. And I will give a very short few examples. First of all, one city that has been mentioned several times, a city which was extremely violent, the city of Diadema, had one of the highest homicides rates in the country, even the world. Then the mayor passed a law closing the bars from 11 in the evening to 6 a.m. That was a very important law, and we made the research when we showed that basically before the law you have a high mortality. After the law has been imposed and enforced, we have a decrease, a substantial decrease in violence. So number of lives in the first 4 years of the law, we saved 522 lives did not die because of the enforcement of the law. That was an important law. It was an important paper. We published in American Journal of Public Health. But unfortunately, this experience was expanded for a few cities in Brazil. At least 20 cities in Brazil are doing the same thing, closing the bar at 11 in the evening. But unfortunately, didn't become a state, not even a national law. It was a success in terms of research, in debate, but not in change of the law. Second example that I will give you is incredible that in Brazil, any teenager can enter a bar or supermarket. In 90% of the cases, they will buy alcohol. We did a purchase survey in 5 capitals in Brazil and showing that data. That's very easy for the teenager to buy alcohol in Brazil. Thus, as a consequence, we did a national survey, and we could show that there is a huge increase in the last 6 years in the drinking pattern, especially of teenage girls. One of the highest increase of change of pattern in teenage girls. Okay, one city in the state of São Paulo, they create a coalition together with organization from the United States, CADICA, and they try to enforce this law. They create a coalition of judges, the teachers, fathers, priests, and try to enforce the law. And it's very easy. It was very easy for these teenagers in this city to buy alcohol. But after a few months, they show that just this small fiscalization changed completely. Although 56% of the teenagers still are buying alcohol without any constraints, but it's nearly half of the national average. That is a good example. It was a good example because of this data, the governor of the state of São Paulo is the most populated in Brazil, around 40 million people. And they passed a law, create a fiscalization system in order to teenagers. And that's become the first law in Brazil who create a system to fiscalization, not only to sell alcohol to minors, but also if the minor is consuming in the premises. That's a different law, and we are very hopeful that that's become an important law. The third example that I will give to you, it was a national example. We made similar to South America, a petition to ban advertisement of alcohol. We got 500,000 signatures. We took to the National Congress. It was a very important moment in my life to do advocacy in the Congress. Initially, we thought that the national government were in our side, but of course we could touch the pressure of the alcohol industry. And unfortunately, at the last minute, the federal government gave up, and this law dropped. But it was so embarrassing to the government that they proposed a new law creating a drinking driving law. And it was a radical law where the blood alcohol level has to be 0. There's a few countries where they have a 0 tolerance to drink and drive. Of course, the enforcement is still far away, but we could show in research in 2 or 3 years that the numbers of people driving intoxicated on the streets is decreasing. That's one hold block survey that we did before and after the law. Half of the people drinking and driving. And even in a national survey, we could show that we have 20% less people drinking and drive. Although the level of people drinking and drive is really high in Brazil, but we could show that we create a national law with a very tough measure of 0 tolerance, and some areas of the country, like São Paulo and Rio, the enforcement in the last 2 years has been quite good. Then I think I could show you these 3 examples that we can do something. It's very difficult, it's very hard, and nothing comes very easy in an environment where you can receive so much pressure from the alcohol industry. Not only from the alcohol industry, but the media, the television, the distributors of the alcohol. In Brazil have one particularity. The politicians, they don't receive money from the alcohol industry, but they receive money from the distributors. Because the distributors, they distribute beer and soft drinks and so on, is a very important part of the business. And then they will defend very hard any restriction of alcohol consumption. Well, The third and last message that I want to do, what the countries are doing in Latin America. The resources are very, very, very few. I mean, the PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, and Dr. Maricela Monteiro is doing quite a lot with virtually no money. I don't know how she can work with that, but she's really clever and very hard work. She created even a Pan American Association of people working in alcohol and drugs. Last year in Mexico, he organized a meeting funded by the Mexican government with 30 countries to discuss alcohol policy. We are far away. My feeling is that the officials working for the government, they have a long way to understand the real business of public health and alcohol. But I think it is a start. I mean, we have never had this before. You have a lot of seminars, courses on the web, try training people around Latin America. Then I think PAHO is doing lots with just a few resources. They are translating very important scientific books and so on. But what is happening down the ground in the countries? I think Mexico perhaps is one of the become more hopeful. They are very active in changing the laws to increase tax. Perhaps it's the only initiative in Latin America, as far as I know. They are trying to increase tax, decreasing availability, increase service, particularly in primary care service. Mexico City, in particular, is creating new law to regulate publicity, increase tax, and put a limit in selling points. Several states are implementing drinking and driving laws, and the Mexican government seems to be very committed to have a strong regional role in terms of alcohol policy. As I mentioned, they sponsor the PAHO meeting in 2012. Peru is changing the law in Lima to control time of the day allowed to sell alcohol and to decrease violence. And part of the project is financed by IDRC with the collaboration of SALIC as well. Argentina, the only change of the law is to transform wine in a national product. That's not very hopeful there. Uruguay has a proposal to change the law in many things, but they are at the same time, this has been overshadowed by the law legalizing cannabis. Then I don't know what's happening in Uruguay. And Chile, they are in a very mood of self-regulation of the advertisement influenced by the alcohol industry and very few action on the brief intervention in primary care. Ecuador is something important. They ban all alcohol advertising, but the alcohol industry is fighting the law very actively. That would be interesting to follow what's happening in Ecuador. Colombia also is very ambivalent in terms of policy, insisting on the harm reduction, and they are collaborating with the alcohol industry. That I want to try to show you this very brief view of what is happening in Latin America. For me, the main point for us on a daily basis is how to cope in a region where this unregulated alcohol market. For me, I can make a strong contrast when you discuss about license. For Latin America, to talk about license is very far away what we are doing on the ground. But I think that's the challenge, and I hope you can learn from each other for a better future on the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ronaldo. I would like to introduce the next speaker. He is going to present Korean National Alcohol Policy Draft. From WHO strategy, Bangkok Declaration, and from the international recommendation, we had some kind of small committee to make this one. So we could have the final draft something that we are presenting right now. During the presentation, Dr. Moon will submit this draft to the member of the National Assembly, to Dr. Kim Chun-jin, who has been elected 3 times, mostly. So I think this is a really good opportunity to submit our proposal to the National Assembly. Dr. Moon is the Professor Emeritus of Seoul National University. He was a Professor of Health Policy and former Dean of School of Public Health Seoul National. And also he was the President of Korean Society of Alcohol Science. Please welcome Dr. Moon.
Let's talk about Korean Alcohol Policy Act drafted. As time is so short, let me summarize very briefly the background. Alcohol is a risk factor, as you know, among many others, and is known as the 3rd leading risk factors. It accounts for 4% of deaths worldwide, and account for 5.5% global burdens of disease. We all know that. And alcohol consumption leads to many negative impacts on all dimensions of health: physical health, mental health, social health, as well as the spiritual health. The extent of alcohol-related harm does not confine to only those to drinkers. It extends to families, communities, society as a whole. So this is really a big burden to us. Alcohol consumption associated with poverty. Drinkers from lower social class actually consume alcohol in more harmful way. Korea had a continuous opportunity to ameliorate their alcohol-related problem, but it is the Health Promotion Act which actually provides the muscle to the Korean society. Compared to other countries, the major limitations are strength of the policy content is very weak. We need more regulatory measures. And also, the implementation at local level is very low. So generally, we can say Korean alcohol policy is much far from being effective. What are the major drawbacks? You already know, since you come here, you have heard so much. The first one is the weakness and inappropriateness of alcohol policy contents. As I told you again, very poor regulation. Everybody can buy and everybody can sell alcohol at any time of the day, you see. And second, weaknesses in implementation, as I mentioned already. And thirdly, lack of efficient monitoring and evaluation. So we need a more firm scientific basis for that. And then lastly, a very poor preparedness in case of a new threat, you see. In order to draft the National Alcohol Policy Act, we need some conceptual framework. So I borrowed the idea from Dr. Tamalangsis and Professor Babel's work. The drinking pathway on the above is from Dr. Tamalangsis. Actually, the alcohol consumption is the functions of social norms and marketing force industry. So between these two forces, as Sally mentions, the alcohol policy works in terms of strength of alcohol policy and its implementation, availability of alcohol and individual factors, and drinking initiation at the age limitation, something like that. So you see, once the alcohol consumption occurs, we can follow the models done by the Professor Weber, the harm pathway. The alcohol hazard, in other words, alcohol harm is actually the functions of patterns of alcohol and the amount of volumes. Patterns of alcohol and volumes are actually closely related. Alcohol give us toxicity and dependence and intoxication, which leads to chronic diseases and injuries and accidents and acute diseases, and also social consequences, acute and consequences, and chronic. So the goal is how to reduce these alcohol consumptions in order to reduce chronic disease, in order to reduce injuries and accidents and acute diseases, as well as social consequences. How to do that? We want to have our more sound alcohol policy. The purpose, which was already read by Professor Sally Caswell, let me read it again, to contribute to the public health and happiness through preventions of harmful drinking and alcohol-related harms by controlling the environment of alcohol consumption. This is the Article 1. And in order to elaborate, we need some ethical background. What the Korean people want from this act, you see. So I put several things. All Koreans have the right to security against alcohol-related accident and violence. Second, all Koreans have the right to information and education regarding the results of harmful use of alcohol. Thirdly, child and adolescent should be protected from drinking, advertising, and promotion and sponsorships. Fourthly, selling of alcohol to minors under the age of 20 should be banned. If it is too strong, then it should be restricted. Fifth, women should be protected from the alcohol consumption at early stage of pregnancy, if you remember the fetal alcohol syndrome. Sixth, those who do not want to drink alcohol have the right not to do so. It's a big problem, the forced alcohol drinking in private sectors, particularly in big companies. The boss usually forced his juniors to drink. Lastly, those who are affected by alcohol harm have the right to treatment and rehabilitation. This is what we want to know, we want to achieve. So in order to achieve the objectives, we put 5 policy framework as an analytical criteria. The first one is limiting physical accessibility to alcohol. And secondly, modifying drinking attitude. Thirdly, risk reduction. And fourthly, alcohol policy in all levels and area. And lastly, establishing efficient and supportive environment for alcohol policy. More specification, under the limit on physical accessibility, we put 5 specific items. And the second, modifying drinking attitude, we put 2, and I will elaborate more later. So this is the entire content, but let's go one by one, see. The first framework is limit on physical accessibility. We want to reform the National Tax Act. Change from ad valorem tax based upon the price, should be changed to a specific unit tax. This is included in Article 22, and impose a special designated tax in Article 22 and 23. And during the conference, we learned that minimum alcohol pricing is very effective. So currently, the standard alcohol, standard unit costs around 201, which is around 20 cents, you see. So we wanted to raise it almost 5 times, at least, you see, around $1. That's a major tool. Thirdly, modifications of licensing systems for retail share. The first one is change from currently everybody can sell it without any restrictions, but we have to change it to a permit system. In advance, you have received the permit. It's under the Article 11, and limit the places of alcohol sale and consumptions. In other words, licensed liquor shop needed. And limits on hours of alcohol sale, 12 to 9 o'clock, you see, a.m. We want some limitation on that, not selling. Fourthly, reinforcement of underage drinking prevention. Raise the minimum legal drinking age from 19, current 19 to 20, raise modestly, as alcohol is so prevalent and society's culture is so generous, so we want to go step by step from 19 to 20. And we need more strict identification check. Lastly, prohibit delivery of alcohol beverage through mails or purchase by electronic means. It's possible to, Korea has a very strong IT systems, and we are under the risk of this kind of risk, you see. The second framework is modifying drinking attitude. We prepare some limits on alcohol advertising and promotion in Article 17. And secondly, mandatory education of workers in alcohol-related job and businesses under the Article 16. And second framework was risk reduction. The first one, system to prevent harmful drinking, providing service to protect and support indirect victims of alcohol, such as pregnant women or sexual violence measure to prevent and reduce disruptions of public orders. And secondly, enhance measures against driving under the influence of alcohol. I think this is really effective, but we want to reduce blood alcohol contents from currently 0.15% to 0.03. We want to raise the standard. And increase frequency of random road checkpoint for driving. Mostly the policemen want to stay the place they used to stay, you see, so people already know where to avoid, you see. So a random checkpoint is needed. And strengthening penalties on offenders and introduce education and treatment systems. Thirdly, we want to introduce screening and treatment services for high-risk drinkers under the Article 27. And the last one, fourth one is alcohol policy in all areas. Establish a comprehensive alcohol policy and enforcement plan at national as well as regional level, and establish educational plans in all workplaces and schools level. And the last framework is establish efficient and supportive environment for alcohol policy. Under this title, there are 5 measures. Basis for cooperation and delegation and advocacy in all fields and areas. So we want to create a national alcohol policy committee under the presidency. This is quite a very important one. We expect more. And secondly, secure clear basis for establishment of alcohol policy through investigation and research. And thirdly, we want alcohol research center like that one of Thailand, you see. We want to create our own standards. And training of professionals is, of course, quite natural one. And lastly, evidence on education for moderations of drinking. See, not stop or cessations of our drinking, just the moderation. As society is so permissible, you cannot suddenly cut. So moderation, alcohol drinking moderation, and public campaign and public strengthening advocacy. So the draft, actually, the act draft consists of 8 chapters and 36 clauses. It is shown on page 130 to 136 of this conference proceedings. It was included in English as well as in Korean from page 138 to 146. You see that? Let me sum up. Opportunities for evidence-based alcohol policies that better serve the public goods are more available than ever before if we have this kind of law. And National Alcohol Policy Act, the draft, provides ample sources of regulations, which we need more. And thirdly, the act, I believe, the act enable us to help reducing alcohol consumption via evidence-based alcohol intervention strategies and relieving social burdens. What should be further needed? What should be considered more? I think in the future, so relationship with alcohol industry should be inserted, and the roles of civil society and roles of primary care, and alcohol-free campus for university students specifically, and curbing illicit trade on alcohol products, and so on. This is the drafted one. I think alcohol is so prevalent in Korea. If we succeed, I believe strongly the other countries, particularly developing countries, will succeed also, you see. So please see Korean case as good examples. Thank you so much.
Now we are going to submit our draft to the National Assembly. Please welcome Dr. Kim.
I have been working to reduce the damages of alcohol in the civic field long before entering the National Assembly. During the 17th National Assembly, I motioned the National Health Promotion Act, which imposed a levy on high alcoholic content beverage. And during the 18th National Assembly, I pursued various legislation to establish the national alcohol strategy and related policy. I am deeply impressed that world experts in alcohol have gathered in Seoul, Korea, to devise the model bill on a Korean-style national alcohol policy and receiving a policy proposal crafted by these experts is a heavy burden on my shoulders. This proposal is a highly meaningful effort. People today, domestic alcohol experts, submitted individual opinion on legislation regarding the approach to alcohol regulation, on the advertisement on alcoholic beverage reforming, the alcohol tax, strengthening TWI, criteria, nurturing related experts, and carrying out education programs in schools. But this is the first time that these opinions have come together as a detailed, comprehensive bill. Having been a committed workers in the area of alcohol-related bills and parliamentary activities, the proposal seems to have a few points that lead to improve such the way. The bill has been devised, but I believe it become the basis for an onset of multiple bills and discussions to reduce the damages of alcohol. I also offer you my word that I will do my very best to contribute to this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim and Dr. Moon, for your wonderful session. I have a quick announcement. Is there Sabera Khalidin here? Sabera Khalidin here? Okay. Please come to take your seat. And also, is there Lavi Kandia from Sri Lanka? If he's not come, please, you may come. Okay, thank you. Because this session is a really meaningful session to the global level. At this moment, we'll make a conclusion and a summary of this whole conference, and also we'll declare the whole Seoul Declaration at this moment. Summary, I think we had one wonderful team, repertoire team. I think from all the volunteers from all the country, especially lots of the Thai friends helped us to make this report. I would like to thank you, Dr. Udomsil Sulsangnam, Mac Surasak, and all Thai friends, and also all the volunteers for making this wonderful report. Without Thai friends' help, I think it is not possible to have this kind of a wonderful conference. I really thank to Thai government, Dr. Udomsil, and Thai friends. I would like to introduce the speaker, David Jonigan, at this moment. Dr. David Jonigan is a director of a Center on Alcohol Marketing and Youth, funded by Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as associate professor in Department of Health, Behavior and Society at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Also, he has served as an advisor to World Bank and World Health Organizations. Please welcome Dr. David Jonigan.